Diolch, Andrew, and thank you for those comments in terms of the warm-up manner. Perhaps I see us more as a comedy duo, but you'll need to decide who the straight man is as far as us together is concerned. And so, Brynhawn da Gydweithwyr, a chroeso i'r sesiwn arweinyddiaeth. Welcome to this leadership session. It is my privilege to spend some time with you this afternoon and to share some thoughts, some ideas, and some insights as far as leading with purpose, authenticity, and adaptability. Can I share something with you, please, in starting? I feel a little nervous. Now, some of my colleagues in the Academy of Wales that I shared that with said, that's not like you, Ian, but I do feel a little nervous, being sort of judged by a jury of my peers, to use a Paul Simon lyric. And I shared this feeling of nervousness and apprehension on my family WhatsApp page earlier this morning. And something really helped me. There were lots of little things. You'll be fine, okay, you'll be excited, all those things which are great. And then my daughter said something that really resonated. She said, Dad, just do you. And if I were to say nothing else this afternoon, can I say just do you, as far as authenticity is concerned? But we will explore it in a little greater depth. If I may introduce myself and my professional background, that's certainly how I've known Andrew initially, with him working in NHS Wales. I think we both worked in Morriston. Andrew, I know I've heard you speak about your time in Morriston Hospital many years ago. And so I'm a nurse by profession. The uniform dates me, doesn't it? Yeah. I registered and qualified just after dinosaurs had left the earth. But certainly that's my professional background. I also spent 11 years in the Army Medical Services, and until about, I wish I could get into the suit, I can assure you these days, but up until about 2-3 years ago, I led an organization of about 2,500 members on a voluntary basis, and that was a great experience. I share this with you, not in a gratuitous way, but simply to say that I have some lived leadership experience, mostly within the public and also a little bit in the voluntary sector as well. And I used to joke that the only time I ever put on a uniform was when I appeared as an extra, or I'd be told off for that. It's a support artist, darling. And if you look closely on there, you will see I've got Hobby City notes under my arm, but I have appeared on the series. I never used to watch it. My mum used to say, saw you last night, Ian. Thanks, man, for looking at that. But I was privileged a couple of years ago during the COVID-19 pandemic to put on a staff nurse uniform again. And it was a privilege. I felt so humble, almost going back to my roots as far as clinical nursing was concerned. And as you can see from this picture, I was involved in the rollout of the vaccination. I worked as a bank staff nurse in addition to other roles that I have as well. And those other roles include, I work on an independent basis, self-employed, run a little consultancy, which I've done for almost 20 years. And of course, I'm here today with my Academy of Wales hat on. And in my role, certainly professional roles, I love to ask questions, not in any kind of nosy way, but certainly in terms of professional curiosity. And can I start, as I mean to go on this afternoon, and share with you what I refer to as question mawr, the big question. Are you ready for this question? I can tell. Are you ready for this question? All right then, here it comes. What kind of future are you creating or even sustaining by the way you're currently thinking or behaving? I'd like you, please, not meant as a stick to beat us with, but a mirror to reflect upon. What kind of future are we creating or even sustaining by the way we're currently thinking or behaving? What kind of team? What kind of organization are we creating or possibly sustaining? I'm not one for reading from slides. Please read that for yourselves. This is another person who has been on this stage at previous summer schools, Dr. Meg Wheatley. And I share this quote with you because some years ago, you'll be familiar with the phrase, if we always do what we've always done, we'll always get what we've... And how many of us act surprised when that happens? Yeah? And I find that's a bit sort of resigned acceptance, that phrase. It's a bit laissez-faire. I much prefer a phrase I heard from Roy Lilly. Some of you may have come across him, a former NHS chief executive, and certainly today, there's a commentator on the NHS. You'll hear him on Radio 4, on his podcasts, etc. And I heard him speak at a conference in Llandudno, and he said this: if you want what you've never had, you have to do what you've never done. I much prefer that. Doesn't that feel a bit more proactive that we're taking responsibility. If we want what we've never had, then we have to do what we've never done. And I hope this week acts as a platform or as a springboard for you to do something that you haven't done before. Whatever that may be, I'll let you decide as far as that's concerned. So I guess I'd like to ask you another question. How prepared are you to think or act differently as a result of this summer school? What have you seen? What have you heard? What have you felt? What are you seeing? What will you hear? What will you feel that will motivate you and inspire you to be a more effective leader? That's why we're here. There are other benefits, of course, but essentially that's why we're all here. In terms of other questions, I'd like to pose a few other questions to you. And it's Wednesday afternoon. They may feel a little existential, a little philosophical, but should we go for it anyway? You ready for this? Okay, the first question. Why are you here? I don't mean here in Lampeter, but why are you here? Where are you going? How will you get there? And what's important to you? My personal view is that I believe that these 4 questions are perhaps some of the most important questions any leader, any team, any organization should ask themselves. Let me explain why. In leadership terms, why we are here is our purpose, and I will spend a little time looking at that this afternoon. Where we are going is our vision. How we will get there is our mission. And what is important to us are our values, our core values. We heard Andrew mention about the importance of values in the workplace, that we live those values, that we exemplify those values as leaders. In essence, these 4 areas, may I suggest to you, and we'll explore this a bit later, are an inner compass that guide our decision-making as leaders. There are other factors and other variables, of course, but these are 4 critical ones, I believe, that contribute to what's called a true north. And we'll explore that a little bit later. Let's focus on purpose. Mark Twain once said, the 2 most important days in our life are the day that we're born and the day we find out why. I'm curious. I'd like you please, on your tables, facilitators, would you help me as far as this is concerned? Let's facilitate a discussion. It's not going to be me, thank goodness, talking for the next 55 minutes or so. But please, on your tables, I'd like you to consider 2 questions. First of all, simply, what is purpose? And allied to that is, what is purpose-driven leadership? Once you've discussed that on the table, I'm going to show you a short video. And her name is Dr. Erika Kleerstorfer. And she will share very briefly her own insights and feelings about purpose, and particularly purpose-driven leadership. So if we could have the house lights up a bit, that would be helpful as well, if that's possible. And let's sort of change the dynamic in the room. If we can't, that's fine. But certainly on your tables, a round table discussion, would you share with each other? Facilitators, if you could help, if needed. I'm sure it'll be self-directed. What is purpose, and what you also believe is purpose-driven leadership? Thank you. Over to you. Diolch. Let's come back together again, please. And let's press the pause button on our conversations. We're going to drill a bit deeper as far as this is concerned. But this is some preliminary investigations into what is purpose, and particularly what is purpose-driven leadership. I had the privilege a couple of years ago to participate in the Oxford Executive Leadership Program. It was a huge learning experience for me. I gained so much. And I'll share a couple of insights. And particularly this video is short, but nevertheless is quite insightful in terms of the question we're asking on the slide. So in a nutshell, we heard Dr. Kleerstorfer mention about purpose, particularly purpose-driven leadership. When the session is finished, I'll be sharing a QR code, and there'll be a number of links to reputable journals, including the Harvard Business Review, which look at purpose in much more detail should you choose to do so. Please, I commend you to have a look at those. So we heard it's the reason somebody or something exists. Of course, it's much, much more than that. A number of years ago, I had what was called a desk. Anybody remember those? Do you remember those? We used to personalize. We'd come in. Funnily enough, I had a mentor who worked for IBM. I wanted someone outside of the public sector, and I was very fortunate to have a chap called Jerry Ingram, who worked for IBM in Europe. And I remember going to the IBM headquarters near Heathrow. And I said, Gerald, I've noticed, I was expecting pictures of his family and all those little personal trappings. And he said the philosophy of IBM was not to have that because ultimately they didn't want you sitting at the desk. They wanted you out there with people, with potentially customers as well. And so it was taking away those trappings. As you can see from this picture, I didn't follow that philosophy. And when I worked some time ago for what was called NLEA, some of us in the room worked in that organization, the National Leadership Agency, I had this phrase: the main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. Now, we might smile at that, but it's something that's been a bit of my mantra for many, many years. Because do you know what? It's really easy to get caught up in the thick of thin things. I think it was Goethe, the German philosopher and writer, who once said, the things that matter most must never be at the mercy of the things that matter least. And it's a tension, isn't it? Because what I think is important, you may not. And that's often where we get tension or even conflict within our teams, within organizations. But the important thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. Let me share an example of that, please, and permit a personal experience. About 2.5 years ago, I was approached. We've heard the term imposter syndrome. This is what I was experiencing. I was approached to chair a committee. The then, I'm not sure how many prime ministers ago it was, the then prime minister appointed Fiona Bruce MP, not Fiona Bruce Antiques Roadshow or Question Time, but Fiona Bruce MP, to be the UK special envoy for freedom of religion or belief. And the government held an international ministerial in London, and it was a huge affair. And I was approached to chair a committee, a UK-wide committee, to ensure that 100 fringe events supported this international ministerial. Once I'd sort of thought about this, I did say yes to the opportunity. It was a huge learning curve for me. Why am I sharing this with you? Because we had 6 months to organize 100 activities, not physically organized, but through our networks and other groups to ensure that 100 fringe activities occurred in Wales, England, Scotland, and Northern Ireland. The committee consisted of about 11 or 12 individuals, only one I'd ever met before. And I was asked to chair the committee. I soon realized that the people I were working with, who were in senior roles, much senior than myself and very influential, and networks far greater and extensive than mine. And of course, they had a view. They had a perspective. And my role was to focus that group. And it was a challenge. Nevertheless, the reason I'm sharing this is because my role was to keep the main thing, which meant when we met on a monthly basis, that's all we had. We were meeting virtually. We were going to meet in Westminster initially, but because of coming out of lockdown at the time, and we met on a Zoom meeting once a month for 1 hour. And can assure you that it was like herding cats sometimes, in terms of, because people had their own agendas. But what I found most helpful was going back to purpose. So for example, Jackie, I'm not going to put you on the spot. Let's say Jackie was one of the committee members. And Jackie, I would say simply like, can we just pause for a second? Jackie, in what way is that contribution or conversation going to impact on our purpose? That was difficult for some people to hear. But once they got used to this idea of keeping the main thing, then those meetings were far more productive. We judged the efficacy of meetings on the main thing. And to cut a long story short, by the time the International Ministerial was held in June 2 years ago, we had organized or been involved in organizing 137 fringe activities. And we had fulfilled our purpose, our reason for being. And once it was finished, the committee disbanded and we went our way. I share that with you because so often we can get caught up in the thick of thin things. In a voluntary role I have currently, for every outline or agenda I send out, there's a purpose at the top. We identify the purpose of that meeting and do our best to stay focused on that and not get distracted by other things. That's a personal view. I'll let you decide how that might work for you. You would not be surprised to know that lots of organizations have purposes. So let's have a bit of interaction. This is a bit of a quiz on your table. So would you get together on your tables, and once you know it, it's first to the buzzer. We don't have a buzzer. And if I'd spoken to Andrew, I know he would have organized it, but we don't have it. But certainly, if you confer on your table, and the first one's a shout out. I'm going to put, these are corporations and organizations, and this is their purpose. The first one, to provide access to the world's information in one click. An easy one to start. Do you want to confer, or someone can be brave enough to shout out? Google, absolutely. How many of us have accessed Google already today? Almost all of us. Other search engines are available. Okay. But absolutely right. That is the reason they exist. That is their purpose. Let's look at another one. To bring inspiration and innovation to every athlete in the world. Have a bit of a conference on your table if you want to. The Olympics is coming up. Give yourselves a tick if you get this one right. Absolutely. That is the reason they exist. If you look at their vision statement, part of the vision statement is to crush their competitors, to crush them. Some of you are thinking, I know a local public sector organization. We won't go there. Let's look at another one. To be the most creative organization in the world. It could be Apple. It could be. Have a bit of a, I'll give you some little clues. And we pay an annual fee to this organization or through the government. And we watch their news channel. It is. That is their purpose. Go on their website, and that is their purpose. You may question or disagree with the purpose, but certainly that is their purpose. Two more, then we'll move on. To make people happy. It is not Cadbury's. And he was thinking, who do you think? To make people happy. I can hear lots of offers here. Absolutely, well done, yes. And how many, give yourselves a round of applause for that. Would anybody here agree that they fulfill their purpose? Has anyone here been happy as a result of Disney, watching a film or whatever? Your husband went to Disneyland? All right. But that is the reason they exist. Let's look at the last one. A little more tricky, this one. To create a better everyday life for the many people. I realized I'd been pronouncing their name incorrectly from a recent television campaign. Their colors are the same colors as the Ukrainian flag, and they have an outlet in Gravesend in Cardiff. IKEA. That is the reason they exist. So it's all very well being aware or knowing what's these big multinational corporations, the reason they exist. But what about ourselves? What about the Well-Being of Future Generations Act? Each of us in this room has a responsibility to improve the social, economic, environmental, and the cultural well-being of people in Wales. We all have a role to play. And interestingly, it's mutual, isn't it? Because we're on the receiving end of that if we live in Wales as well. But that is part of our purpose. I'm sure your own purpose in your organization is much finer than that, but essentially that is our role, working and contributing towards that purpose in Wales. And of course, we do that in many, many ways. In Academy Wales, I'm not going to ask anyone to read this out. In fact, Jenna, would you read this out for us, please? I'd love you to do this. Thank you very, very much. Now, you will decide this week whether or not we are working towards or fulfill that purpose. And we'll let you decide, but we hope that you feel that we're fulfilling that purpose. Let's dig a little bit deeper, especially on a personal level, because this is where it really changes our mindsets. I'd like you please to consider these questions. What is your purpose? What's the reason you exist? I'm particularly thinking in your professional roles. That's why we're here. How do your values, your strengths, your passions and experiences, how do they shape that purpose? And the two final questions are, how aligned are you with your purpose? And finally, what evidence would you provide to support that alignment? I'd like you, please, we've got different thinking styles and preferences in this room today. I'd like you to just reflect on those for a moment. Some of you may want to write your answers down. But shortly, I'm going to ask you to leave the comfort of your tables. And I'd like you to please get involved in some co-coaching. I'd like you to step into your discomfort zone. There's the script. But I'd like you to go and find somebody not on your table. Stand up, please. Let's change the energy in the room. And I'd like you to have a conversation with each other. And so take a moment just to reflect on those. Some of you want to get up straight away. Others of you are still reflecting on the first question. In terms of your professional role, the reason you're here in terms of your organization, your profession, how would you respond to those questions? So please, when you're ready, would you leave your tables? You can take a pen and paper with you if you choose, or just go freestyle and just, would you go and find somebody preferably you haven't met before today, and would you have a conversation? We'll take about 5 or 6 minutes, and I think in terms of continuity, it'd be helpful. So if it was Mark and I meeting together, Mark would ask me these questions in that order, and then once I've replied, then I would ask him, etc. So please, leave your tables. Let's hear some conversations in relation to these questions. Thank you. Let's all come back together. There is an energy, there is a power when we connect or reconnect to our purpose, the reason we exist. It's tangible. Did you hear it? Did you hear it? Did you feel it? And what a great opportunity to come to places like summer school and to be reminded of that and other things as we go through the next few days together. Let's move further. And of course, there are some benefits, and particularly from an organizational basis, the benefits of purpose-driven leadership particularly, and having members of the organization, staff, people, whatever term we want to use, has benefits too, and they include these organizations are more productive. They tend to outperform and outlast other organizations. And of course, it increases our well-being and happiness. And who wouldn't want that in our personal and professional lives? Any Japanese speakers here? No? We do, okay. So you might want to mark my homework here. I did check it with my neighbor who is Japanese speaking. She works for a multinational company and uses a number of languages. I'm not going to put you on the spot. But my understanding is that this Japanese word literally is pronounced ikigai. And it literally means reason for being. And we see that in business parlance sometimes, isn't it? The use of Japanese words, and they can be a bit trendy, sometimes a bit jargony. JIDS, have you heard of that before? JIDS? No? Jargon-induced drivel syndrome? Yeah. Have we ever experienced that? I'm sure I've contributed to it over the years. But I'd like you to consider your ikigai. And to help you with that, I have no conflicts of interest as far as this is concerned. There is a resource. There it is at the bottom. ikigaitest.com. It's useful, it's valuable. And if you would like to undertake it, it's absolutely free, except for the amount of time you would need to devote to complete it. And it will be on the link I'll give you at the end as well, if you want to access it that way. But certainly the Ikigai test will inform you in these areas. It will help you understand the things you love, you're good at, what you can be rewarded for, and that's not just financial remuneration, job satisfaction, the idea of getting up and looking forward to going to work. I'm very blessed. I love going to work. I enjoy what I do. That's a bigger reward than any other remuneration. And what the world or your community needs. And should you undertake this test, and I urge you to do it, you will then receive a graphic. It will appear on the screen. You can save it as a PDF, and then you'll have a little more detail, which might either confirm your purpose, or it may even question what you do in terms of your current role, etc. I'll leave that to you. So as we bring a little close to this particular aspect of leading with purpose, authenticity, and adaptability, let's just close the lid for a moment on purpose. And can I perhaps take a traffic light approach? As you consider some of the things that we've explored in the last little while together, what would you stop doing? What would you continue doing? And what might you start doing? Please take a moment. On your tables are some A4 sheets. Can I ask Jackie, could you hold them up so everyone can see them? So I'm using the same print that I have on the screen there. Thank you, Jackie, appreciate it. Would you please turn to your sheets and would you look at the first one in terms of purpose? And it may not be anything, you don't have to answer the three things, but what out of those would you stop doing? What would you continue doing? And what would you start doing? Manfred Ketz de Vries, who once worked at INSEAD in France, he said that leaders should sound like scratched records. I can use that now because vinyl's back in, isn't it? But we should be constantly like a scratch record, people hearing about purpose and other aspects of that true north. More of that in a moment. So just take a moment to reflect. When you leave here this week, in terms of purpose, what will you either stop, continue, or start doing? It may be you might start putting the purpose of the meeting on the agenda and reflecting upon whether that meeting achieved its purpose. It may be digging a little deeper. It may be to undertake the Ikigai test. That may be something that you will start doing. You decide for yourselves. Can I also share with you, this is a very, the facilitators in the room will be familiar with this traffic light approach. I have found it interesting in leadership. Several years ago, in a voluntary role I had, when somebody new joined the senior team, I would have a conversation something along these lines. Bethan, not going to put you on the spot. Bethan, would you help me? Over the next 5 or 6 weeks, as we work together, would you take a moment to observe what I do and what I say? And then in about 6 to 8 weeks, let's sit down together, and I'd like you to come to that meeting prepared to tell me one thing I should stop doing. 2 things perhaps I could do differently. And if you could find 3 or 4 things you think I do okay, I'd like to hear that as well. It created a culture in the organization of effective feedback. And some people would say then, Bethan, does he really mean that? Oh yes, he did that with me when I started. So again, it's a simple little way of getting feedback and increasing our self-awareness. Let's move on. Let me introduce to you Professor Bill George. Professor Bill George is an emeritus professor at Harvard Business School. He was once chief executive of Medtronic. And those of you working in healthcare, and particularly clinically, will be familiar with the devices, infusion devices, syringe drivers that we use in Wales. And he wrote a book some years ago called Discover Your True North. Again, I have no interest in this except in terms of sharing with you, but no other. I follow him on Twitter. He occasionally replies or retweets my tweets, which is very kind of him. And more recently with Zach Clayton, he's written a more up-to-date version looking at millennials as well. The reason I'm sharing this with you is that when I first read his book years ago, he asked another big question that I'd like to pose to you this afternoon. Because when I first heard that question, it pierced me. It pierced me. He said this: in your personal and your professional life, are you guided primarily by your watch or by your compass? Isn't that a great question? In our personal and our professional lives, are we guided primarily by a watch or by our compass? Now, please don't misunderstand. We need both. Ian Govey is not saying it's one or the other. The watch is critical. In your organizations, your watch is probably your key performance indicators, your targets, your goals, your objectives, your policies, your protocols, your procedures. All those and many other things contribute to the watch. I suppose we could loosely call that management, if I could get away with that. And it's interesting, we manage things, but we lead people. Yeah, please remember that. We manage things, but we lead people. Whereas the compass is very much about our purpose, our vision, our mission, our values, and other aspects. And I have discovered personally, as well as working with organizations, that we set the compass first and then we align the watch to the compass, not the other way around. We will probably spend a huge amount of time on the watch. We'll be checking it regularly, but please remember to align that watch. Make sure it is aligned to the compass and not the other way around. To help you with that, let me give you another resource available in the QR code later. This is a self-assessment on Professor George's website, and if you just Google Discover Your True North. And also in the QR code, you will have access to an MP3 file, which is a 30-minute summary of his book, should you choose to download it or listen to it online. So I invite you to do that. Why am I mentioning Professor Bill George? Well, he particularly talks about true North leaders. And he maintains powerfully that those leaders who have a sense of their true North also are authentic leaders. So let's move on and look at authenticity. What is it? Please read this for yourselves. This is Brené Brown. Some of you will be familiar with her TED Talks. Please read that for yourselves. I think we heard Emmanuel mention and alluding, not to Brené Brown, but certainly some aspects of this. Andrew, I think this morning your opening remarks about being yourself, isn't it? And being our best, the best version of ourselves. How do you and I convey our sense of authenticity, of who we really are, on a consistent basis to those around us? To help us answer this question, if I could introduce you to some additional work of Professor George and also Jason Wingard, who's written extensively on authenticity. And they maintain that when you and I are authentic in our leadership, we have a strong sense of purpose. And that shows in our passion, that motivation that comes from within. We don't need somebody else to motivate us because our purpose, our values motivate us. They also suggest that our behavior is grounded in solid values. We walk the talk. We do what we say. They also maintain that authentic leaders establish strong and connected relationships with their followers. May I commend you to the work of the Arbinger Institute. I'd love to speak more about them. Arbinger. I read a book of theirs called Leadership and Self-Deception. I wish I'd read it 20 years ago. But they talk about outward and inward mindsets. Go onto YouTube and just put Arbinger outward mindset. There's a 3-minute video, and it talks about when we have an outward mindset, we see people as people, not objects. People are the end, not a means to an end. Let's always remember that. And the last 2 points I want to share with you before I invite you to consider the question is that as authentic leaders, we also practice self-discipline on a consistent basis. That's tough. Jim Rohn once said that there are 2 kinds of pain in life. There's the pain of regret and the pain of discipline. I've experienced both. I suspect I'm not alone. It requires discipline and consistency. And finally, we will lead with the heart. And we've heard about the importance of emotional intelligence. Professor Banda alluded to today in her interviews. So please, there's a summary. I'd like you, not in terms of conversation, we need to move on, but I'd like you just to reflect on that for a moment. On your own, in your seats, on your tables, in relation to these 5 areas, how do you convey your sense of authenticity to those around you? There may be one particularly you're thinking of at the moment. You might be thinking of a conversation or situation you've had recently where you drew upon one of these aspects as you led in an authentic or the real you, not trying to be someone or something else. It's important to stand and stare sometimes, isn't it? Yeah, to let the silence do the heavy lifting. Just take another moment to reflect upon how you convey your authentic self to those around you. Let's move on. So in terms of authenticity, if you were to consider, what thing might you stop doing? Are we trying to be someone who we really aren't? Are we trying to give impressions that aren't really us? Yeah. I belong to Swansea Little Theatre, and that's not me. It is me on the stage, but I'm being somebody else. I have another script. I'm often out of my own character. I know it's an act, but that's not what we do on a day-by-day basis. So what would we stop? What would we continue? And what might we start doing? Take a moment to reflect on those aspects. On your sheet of paper, please take a moment to record your responses if you choose. And then we'll come to the final aspect of leading with purpose, authenticity, and that's adaptability. In terms of start, it may be simply to do the True North Mirror. You may download the MP3 and have a listen to that. You will choose what you'll do. It may be something a little more inward looking. You decide. Let's move on as I bring this session to a close in the next 5 or 10 minutes. Let's look at adaptability. And we heard Professor Morris mention about the tension and the conflict that sometimes arises when our authentic self then has to adapt to situations. I'm sure we've had those experiences in the room here, some perhaps more than others. So what is adaptability? On your tables, please, very, very briefly, just a minute or two, would you please share with your colleagues, what do you think it is to be adaptable, particularly in terms of leadership? Over to you, just a minute or so. Thank you. So just a brief table conference there for a moment. Let me share some insights which I believe will help you. Please read these for yourselves. I suspect that those of us who led through COVID would know what adaptive leadership is all about. Many of you are nodding your heads and know what that feels like. Yeah? It really tested our abilities and our ability to adapt, especially under pressure. Can I invite you, when you go back to your application groups, each of you will have a copy of the Academy Wales Sowing Seeds booklet on adaptive leadership. I urge you, it's very readable and it's not sort of size 2 font in there, and I think you'll find it very helpful, and also on systems thinking. And can I just highlight a few things that I think you'll find useful? This is based on the work of Ronald Heifetz at Harvard and other writers too. And there are some principles when we're leading with adaptability. On your tables, can I check that you have a coaching card? It looks a bit like that. That's it. All hold them up as if you're sending somebody off on a football pitch. Okay, the power. And as I go through these, you might want to have a look, particularly on principles for leading adaptive change, not the coaching stuff, that's helpful as well, but certainly. And when we are leading adaptively, it's not a one-size-fits-all, but I hope you find these things insightful. I love this phrase. As leaders, we need to get off the dance floor and onto the balcony. You know what that means. I don't need to explain that. We need to get off the dance floor and onto the balcony to see the bigger picture. I have benefited so much. There have been times where I've been blinded by certain things and I've needed to get away from the busyness, the noise, the action of the dance floor and go onto the balcony and see the bigger picture. That can help us. We need to identify the adaptive change or the challenge. And if it's helpful to you, on the reverse of your cards, I've created some questions which relate to these principles of adaptive leadership. Other models are also available and necessary. We need to maintain disciplined attention. We need to be focused how we keep others, how we keep the main thing when we're dealing with adaptive leadership. We need to regulate distress. It will occur. And sometimes, dare I say, we will need to create some distress. Perhaps a stick of dynamite does need to be placed in a certain place. But sometimes, and those of you who came to the workshop this afternoon, I mentioned briefly about the discomfort zone. That's where effective and sustainable change occurs, is in that discomfort zone. And also we need to give work back to people. We need to trust others. We need to take a risk. Forgive me, those in the workshop, I mentioned often as leaders, we rationalize. And as Dr. Stephen Covey says, when we rationalize, we tell ourselves rational lies. And the rational lie is, it's quicker if I do it. How many of us have thought that? Be honest, almost all of us. It's a rational lie because it allows us, it takes away our freedom and doesn't allow other people to grow. It involves taking a risk, of course it does. And some people may let us down. That's inevitable. But it's important that we remove that rational lie, that rationalization. Finally, protect voices of leadership below. Those who are prepared to speak truth to power, who risk speaking up. Those who are not going to go into passive-aggressive behavior after the meeting, that are willing to say something. So please, I'd like you for a moment to reflect on a time or a situation where being adaptable helped you to make an effective or critical decision. What did you learn from this experience? The last thing we're going to do, I've conferred with Andrew, and if it's okay, we're not going to have a Q&A session because I think the interaction, Andrew, we hope that you're getting some benefits from that. I'd like you, please, first of all, I'm happy for any of you to come up and ask me a question. That's absolutely fine. But I'd like you to reflect on that for a moment. And the last thing we will do as far as interaction today is we're going to get out of our tables again. We'll have the lights up. But I'd like you, please, go back to the same person you were with earlier, if you can find them in the room. If not, go and find somebody else. But think of a time or a situation when you're able to adopt some of these principles, maybe one or more, when you were making an effective or a critical decision. What did you learn from this experience? Please, leave your tables, and if you can't think of an experience, just have a conversation with your colleague about some of these principles. Use the little, take the card with you to remind you of some of the principles as well in terms of digging deeper. But please take a moment to do that. Thank you. In terms of being adaptable, of those principles identified on the cards there, which ones, in terms of adaptability, should you stop doing, continue, or start doing? How do you think that could help you in terms of your adaptive leadership? So some final thoughts from Ian Govia, and then I'll hand the time back to Andrew. Thank you. Diolch yn fawr iawn i chi gyd. Thank you very much to each of you for participating. Thank you for the energy you've brought in your conversations, and I hope that there's something you've seen, heard, or felt that will motivate and inspire you intrinsically to lead with greater purpose, authenticity, and adaptability. Do we have any police officers in the room here? Any at all? Yeah, we do. Okay. And if I can just share this. Tell me your name. If Richard came to our house this evening, or to our room, knocked on the door and said, let me rephrase that. If Richard this evening in the canteen said, I'm arresting you because it has been alleged that you are a leader who leads with authenticity, purpose, and adaptability, would there be enough evidence to convict us? Would there be enough evidence to convict us? I doubt that will happen, but certainly as we finish today, I'm going to show you one short video, and I'm going to leave the final word to Michael Dowling. I think you'll find his words insightful and inspiring. But certainly, how prepared are you to think and act differently as a result of this session? What will you stop? What will you continue? What will you start doing? And what will be the first and most important thing or action you'll commit to following this session? Please, you can take a picture of the QR code and That'll give you a link, not just to my workshop is also on there as well, if you want to have a look at that, if you're not attending. But certainly, if you scan that code, then it will take you to an A4 sheet of references that are aligned to what I've been sharing with you for the last 60 minutes. And it may be simply to undertake the True North Mirror or the Ikigai test. It may be something a little more deeper. But finally, I love these words. I'll let you read them for yourselves. I tweeted these this morning. How many of us believe that? Yeah. Diolch yn fawr. Unwaith eto, may we all move forward and lead with greater purpose, authenticity, and adaptability, especially as a result of this summer school, is my hope. I hope it's yours as well. Diolch yn fawr. Diolch.